Hello again, class. It's virtual Professor Brody, E. Brody, or I. Brody, or I don't know what you want to call me. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about photoshopping techniques to create the non-rendered rendering. And I know that for many of you it's painful to step away from the Revit rendering cloud, but for this one assignment I thought it would be fun to try. I did ask you guys to come up with some kind of inspirational image. It may not be the style that you end up with in your own rendering, but just to get you to look at some of the different options out there. And I particularly liked this image here. What did I Google? I Googled something like architectural rendering, very clever. You can also Google interior rendering or anything you want, frankly. And find an image that you like. What I like is there's kind of a photorealistic quality to it, but then there's also a lot of heavy photoshopping, including the scale figures and an interesting use of black and white, and even a lens flare, which I thought was kind of fun. So, and here we go. I just whipped together a little hotel project. Just kidding. Once again, I stole this off of the 3D warehouse from SketchUp. And what I did is I created several scenes, as you can see up here. Each one uses a different style in SketchUp, and I think I talked about that last time. Now, one of the things that you should notice, or you should know about SketchUp, first of all, sometimes it's handy with a little forethought to do things like put in scale figures in advance. If you go, SketchUp has layers, by the way. You can turn those on and off. And if I go and turn back on the rest of the model, these scale figures are in here, but I am turning them all off. I'll turn the rest of the model off so that I can export them. Also, I believe in the Styles menu, you can probably turn off the sky or make the sky some bright somehow. I'm actually not sure which style I'm using in this particular one, but you can probably turn off the sky here and just turn it off. There we go. And definitely want to make those all as white as you possibly can. Is it showing ground? I'm not even sure. Oh, I think it's just showing background. Okay, there we go. Oh, that didn't work. Let's make background white. Anyway, when you export those, it should show up as completely white, which is what you want. Now, how do you export all these different scenes? And by the way, I also have RPC people in SketchUp. If you have SketchUp installed in the same place that you have ArchVision, you can get these happy little ArchVision people. Look at them. They're all so studious. And of course, they're all here looking at what's going on in the lobby. So they're all in scale and everything. Anyway, to export, by all means, you can go to the Export pull-down menu and choose 2D graphic. However, a little trick is if you go to the animation setting and you choose image set. Now, it depends on how you have your animation set up, but what you can do is you can have it export every scene as an individual image, and you can even choose TIFF or BMP, which are going to have a little higher quality than just a PNG or a JPEG. I'm going to choose PNG because I like it. Anyway, and in the options, basically the largest image you're probably going to get is 4096 by 2160. So that's what I'm going to go with. There are also standard customization, standard formats for things here, including 1080p. Which is a slightly smaller image. You can see here it kind of grays out the image size. That is a lot smaller, 1920 pixels on our printer is just not going to get us a very big image. Anyway, if you click export, and I put mine in the desktop in a folder cleverly labeled exports. I'm not going to do it because it takes a couple minutes. And if you go to that folder here, where did it go? Let me just stretch this out here. Go to my desktop and go to the exports folder. You will see all of those images are here. And of course, they all match in size, right? So as I zip through, they're all exactly the same size. And of course, that's absolutely critical when you do compositing in Photoshop. All right, so speaking of Photoshop, one thing that you definitely do not want to do is open the image directly. Why don't you want to open the image directly? Well, it actually has not a lot to do with Photoshop and a lot to do with InDesign. InDesign, when you drag an image or place an image in InDesign, it uses the native size, the native image size, and then kind of interpolates the size of the or the resolution of the image based on the image size. So you can have a low resolution image that's a large size, and that's why a lot of you get pixelated images even out of InDesign. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to make it in inches. And for us, I forget how big I export. Oh, 4096. So we're not going to get any bigger than 20 inches or so. So I can make this, I'll make it 22 just to be sure. 22 inches. However, you need to make sure you set the resolution to our printer resolution, which is 200. And again, if you do composing of your boards in InDesign, this number gets ignored when you go into InDesign. It's these numbers that are important. So you have to make sure in Photoshop you set the resolution right, or you will end up with a pixelation. So anyway, I'll click OK and get a nice blank image. And a little trick here is that you can actually click and select all of your images and actually drag them right into Photoshop. And what's nice about that, I'll just, it of course is asking for whether or not you want to agree to that. I can just clicking check and allow all of those images to settle in here in Photoshop. Boy, there's a lot of them. Oh, it takes quite a while, doesn't it? There we go. Okay, I think I messed up one of these. I might have moved it before doing it. But anyway, you end up with a long list of images here that are all linked back to the original file. Of course, in Photoshop, you probably experienced the problem that you can't really do a lot to images that are linked. So you have to select these layers here in Photoshop, right-click on them, and choose Rasterize. And Rasterize will convert them, it kind of unlinks them, and then it makes them so that you can edit them, of course. And now they're all labeled by the number. I'm actually going to just turn them all off so we can look at them kind of one by one. Usually things like the people are going to want to be on top. So, you know, it's a good idea to drag those on top. Another thing is I tend to drag the line weight images up a little bit. So, for example, let me turn on 001, I think is just the regular SketchUp image. And actually, I'm going to crop this whole kit and caboodle because I don't even like these little extra pieces here. I'm going to crop it so that it just shows a little bit of column and otherwise centers the image. There we go. So here's the base image. And one of the simplest things that you can do when you lay in things in Photoshop is you can play with adding in line weights. Now, one of the things that is true from SketchUp, but even worse when you get rendered images in Revit, is that it loses the lines. The lines disappear, and it's really noticeable when you have surfaces that are coming together, say a corner of a room, and their walls are painted the same color. You lose that line. So I like to bring that line back in. So I'm going to turn on one or another of these line work layers. I don't know which one I'm going to like the most. So that's why we export so many different ones, is to try them out. So let's start with this one here. And one of the simplest things you can do, you turn on that line work layer, and you might say, hey, I can't see through the white to get through to the layer below. You could, in theory, select all the white using the magic wand and make it delete it. You could lower the opacity of the layer so that you see through it. And this does have a nice effect of kind of washing out those overly saturated SketchUp colors. But the simplest thing is you can change here in this drop-down list the blending mode of the layer. The simplest one, the one that we use most of the time because we're mostly dealing with black and white images, we choose multiply. And what that does, let me just lower the opacity of this layer so you can see the lines a little better. It basically, if it's white, it becomes invisible, and if it's black, it becomes solid. And so, and we can try that with each of these layers here. Again, if it's a layer that is, oh, I'm looking for one that's totally black and white. Oh, here we go, totally black and white. If you make that multiply, again, it preserves the lines, although I think this is the one that I accidentally moved out of the way here. So obviously this one's a little bit out of whack, isn't it? There we go. We could try and reorient it, but frankly, I think it's more trouble than it's worth. What I should have done is not moved it when I imported that image. Anyway, let's go back and we can stick with this guy. And of course, there's things that you can do to make those lines blacker or make them a little thicker, which I've talked about in earlier lectures. All right, so I've got this black and white layer and a color layer. Now, of course, that is a very simple thing to try and bring back some of the line work and kind of beef it up. But let's now talk about another simple thing that you can do in SketchUp to kind of add some style to your drawing. And the simplest one is basically to delete some of the color. It's really nice when you kind of fade from either color to black and white or black and white to color. So I'm just going to select an area and hit delete. And what you can see is that it goes from black and white to color. Now that's a little abrupt, so let me go back here. And first of all, I can soften that edge, that boundary edge of my selection. All I have to do is right-click on it and choose Feather. And feathering is actually something they used to do back in the physical camera days. They would actually use a feather when they were developing photos or exposing them. Anyway, I'll choose Feather. The number you choose depends on the resolution of the image, but for most of you, if you're choosing the maximum SketchUp resolution, you should probably end up with an image that where a feather radius of about 150 is probably good. I'll choose OK, and you can see that the preview gets a little soft. So now when I hit delete, you can see it's a more smooth transition between black and white. The only thing is that I actually don't like that it's black and white in the middle. I want it black and white around the edges. So you can right-click on the image here, the selection, and choose Select Inverse. And selecting Inverse basically means if you have it selected, it's unselecting it, and if it didn't have it selected, it will be selected. Now, if I hit Delete, you can see that you can see that it deleted the perimeter. And is that nice? Well, I do kind of like that. I like that it's a kind of a softer effect. Now, what if you decide that you don't want to destroy the background image? Now, by doing this, I'm basically deleting part of the color image, but I'm not really sure about which line work I want to use yet. So a non-destructive way to do this is to make your selection, but rather than rather than just delete, what you can do, a little trick, is you can make an adjustment layer that dumps a solid color on top of whatever layer that you have. So I'll choose this solid color, and of course this is dumping blue, which is a little disturbing. If I dump white on top of whatever my selection is, first of all, you can see here in the little preview that the selection that I had is transferred into this adjustment layer, so it only applies the adjustment where it's white. And then I can apply my, whoops, forgot to hit apply. Let's try that again. Solid color, make it white, and OK. And now you can see that I've created an adjustment layer that has whited out the area, but if I turn this off, it returns to its normal setting. Okay, and again, like other layers, you can control its opacity if you want to tone it down just a hair. Okay. Now, I think in the end, actually, I like this. Which one was it that I liked? I think I liked. Yeah, I like this layer the most. So I'm going to use this layer, and I'm going to make it multiply. And so I get this nice effect. And now you can see I'm kind of softening it around the image edge, which I kind of like. All right. So that's kind of your basic things that you can do. A couple other things. First of all, I'm going to add in my scale figures. Now, like I did before, I can use blending modes on this scale figure. The only trick is that I forgot before I exported it to delete the background. So in this case, the blending mode won't work because I have paint in the background. If I just delete that, it allows my scale figures to come in rather nicely. I think in this situation, I like the solid figures. Some of you don't necessarily like them or don't like them 100% solid. You can fade them out. Because they're all on one layer, you can do it kind of globally. I like them a little stronger in this type of image. Some people don't like them as colored entirely black. A little trick is that you can magic wand these guys. And I'll just go on this current layer, click the magic wand. I don't have contiguous selected, so it selects them all. And then you can come in and you can actually kind of recolor them pretty easily. If you go to the Edit pull-down menu when they're selected and choose Fill, you can choose any number of colors, or you can choose, I could choose the foreground color, the background color, or I could even just choose a 50% screen of gray, and you can see it recolors them. I don't like them gray, though, so I think I'm going to go back to the way they were. It's my own personal preference. And again, some of you prefer the photorealistic people. In fact, the example that I showed had photorealistic people. I just like a more heavily stylized image, so I prefer it to have the solid black and white silhouette people. I think they're more pronounced. So anyway, I've just been modifying this original kind of background here, but there are other layers that I have created. Some are filtered within SketchUp, and some are filtered outside of SketchUp. And one of the things is by dragging layers up and down in the list and turning on and off these different filters, which now, of course, I've forgotten which layers are which, you can change the composition. This background layer is a little bit more heavily filtered, and I actually think I like it because it seems to have a little bit more texture. Now, the only thing is that I lose some of that texture in the foreground here. So what I want to do is I want to experiment with some filters to see if I can bring back some of that texture that really makes a project seem more, I don't know, tangible, I guess. So first of all, don't mess with your original layer. Be sure to duplicate any layer that you're going to be filtering. And I'm going to drag this guy up here. And I think what I'm going to do is turn off these extra layers here so that I can really see whether or not the filters are working. And I'm just going to start by applying it to this particular layer. In fact, let me make a couple of duplicates just so I can access them a little more quickly. First of all, there we go. We'll make a couple. What I'd like you all to do is to experiment with the filter gallery. And I'm just going to choose, go to the filter gallery here under the filter pull-down menu. One that I happen to like, and look at that, it's even up here, is a plastic wrap. It gets you highlights sometimes that are really interesting. You can experiment with those highlights, including how detailed they are or not. It's going to depend a lot on the image that you have in the background. So by all means, look at what you're seeing and zoom around in this window to see what the entire image is going to look like or specific pieces. And of course, you don't have to use the whole image. You can just use part of it. But anyway, when you click OK, SketchUp applies that image. Now you might say, well, I don't want to see that. I don't want to start applying my filters. However, these things do not have to be 100% opaque. And in fact, sometimes just a touch is all you need to add in that more interesting highlighting. And in fact, you can also do things like call back here. We'll select our area again, and maybe you just want this special feature right in the perimeter. I can use my feathered selection and kind of delete the most annoying part of it, but you see how it gives me a little bit of texture in these foregrounds. Another thing that you can do besides changing the opacity or deleting part of it, you can actually take one of these. I'm just going to actually get rid of it because I have too many layers. Sorry, before I move on, by all means, experiment with these different types of filters. Even though you may not use this as your primary image, you may end up using this as one layer amongst many. One that I think is really interesting is this watercolor image, and you can drag it and change the settings to really get some interesting textures. And there are any number of these, including here's one that I happen to like that is kind of cool. I don't know why I like this one. It's kind of bizarre, but it's the stained glass effect. There's something really cool about that. How does that work in your composition? Again, sometimes just by experimenting and changing the opacity, you can get some very interesting effects. Especially if you wanted something to be a stained glass window, right? Now, those are effects that you can apply to a color layer. Interesting enough, sometimes black and white works a lot better. Now, let me show you a little thing here. An adjustment layer is available that converts the image to black and white, and I think we might have looked at that before. A little trick is I can now select these two layers and glue them together, and all you do is you choose the Merge Layers option with only those two layers selected. Make sure you don't choose Flatten Image, which selects all layers and combines them, or Merge Visible, which obviously only combines the visible ones. So I'll choose Merge Layer. So now I have this one black and white layer, and of course I'm going to duplicate that just in case I want to do something else. Once again, you can apply a number of these filters. And of course they apply quite differently. Here, let's go back to the artistic ones. When you have black and white, you can really get some interesting effects. Let's see here. Try underpainting, or maybe sponge. Sponge something. No, underpainting looks good to me. And again, you can change the scaling of some of these parts, how heavy the relief is, texture coverage. Each of these has slightly different options. When you apply these, what's interesting about these, let me just turn off some of these other layers, is that once again you can use your blending modes to use multiply, and it kind of applies that texture on top of the image. Now, black and white images, there are a couple of other of these blending modes that work, and of course you'll have to just try them to see if they work. One that seems to work pretty good is this pin light, and if I turn back on some of my other layers here, and I'm just going to drag this guy up above the adjustment layer and turn back on my line work, you see how I'm getting kind of some ghosting and a little bit more dottiness to the texture. So applying that pin light blending mode really works pretty well, and a lot depends on the kind of image that you have. Again, let me try this on the standard image here. And again, I'm getting a little bit more texture, a little bit more kind of grit to the paper. So those filters and the blending modes are things that you can really take advantage of to give more interest to your image. Here, I'll even put my scale figures back in there. Okay, so what else can you do in Photoshop? Now, already this is a very, I think, interesting and compelling image. And you can see that just by the gradients alone, I'm getting some lighting effects that are kind of nice. However, there is one effect that a lot of people really enjoy using in a non-rendered image. And this is a lighting effect. And I'm going to duplicate this layer. Just drag it to the top of the stack here. The way the lighting effect works is it only works on your current layer. And let's say I want to create a downlight effect. It's really very straightforward. You just go to the filter menu, and under render there are these things called lighting effects. And I'll just click to select that. And what's neat about the lighting effects, first of all, there's a couple of preset light, I don't know, configurations. So for example, 5 lights down. If I choose that, it gives me 5, you guessed it, 5 downlights. Now it's a little tricky because the way you move these lights in Revit, or in SketchUp, sorry, in Photoshop, has nothing to do with 3D space. This is all just flat image editing. However, what's nice is that you can control each one individually by clicking on it. They can be moved just by clicking and dragging on the little circle. You can also control, if you select all of them, you can control features, for example, how intense they are. And you can also control how much they darken the rest of the image. This ambiance feature allows you to not completely blacken out the rest of your image. So quite reasonably, you could come in here and probably pretty quickly set things up so that they kind of match the downlights that show up on your project. Now, of course, it may be that you didn't put any in, but that's okay because it doesn't matter. It works whether or not you've kind of realistically gotten lighting cans put into your ceiling. You can also create new lights. If you just click the Add New Spotlight button, it shows up here in the list. I believe it was number 6. And you can aim it and move it just like any of the others. Okay? Oh, except I think that's a little wider than the others. Whoa. There we go. So you can see that all of these are actually a little bit too intense for me. There we go. We'll tone it down. So you have a fair amount of control. When you've got them the way you like, you click OK. Now, one thing to be warned of, though, is once you've done that, you can't go back and edit the lights. There's no way to go back. Basically, you can either turn that layer off or on, but you can't go back and edit the lights. The other thing is that you can also light pieces of the space individually if you just use a selection. So if I have a selection here, and I'm on this current layer, and I go back to my filter pull-down menu, choose Render, Lighting Effects, and now, for example, let me choose, I'm just going to choose, I don't know, an individual light so that I just have one light to work with. This one light, as I drag it around, I can change it from its properties. So for example, now it's a point light. Maybe I'll make it a spotlight, and I'll aim it so that it's pointed up, so that I can get a little bit of an effect. And it does appear like it's coloring blue, which is kind of interesting. Let's just make that white. Although I suppose if you wanted one to be white, you could do that. And then we could create another spotlight here. Whoops, and drag this guy in too. That's probably number 2, isn't it? There's probably some easy way to make a copy, which I don't know how to do. But once again, we can control a number of different facets of this light and move it into position, and you can get some pretty interesting effects just like that. And it only worked on the individual selections that I had, and now I'll just drag that down below all of my other images, and you can see it creates a nice little kind of glow underneath my image. Okay, so these effects are really interesting, and they give a lot of your interest to your image. Now, the last thing you might want to try, just to see if you like it, not everybody does, is something called a lens flare. Now, lens flare is one of those things that only works on the current layer. So a trick is you can flatten all the layers. Again, I can just select them and choose flatten image. You could also, at this point, do a save as and save a copy of your image as a JPEG. And I'll just put it right here in my original folder, and I'll just call it composited image. And of course, you always want to save it as the highest quality when you're using a JPEG. And now I'm going to open that guy up. And where did it go? There it is. And the lens flare it's just a nice little touch. Not everybody likes it, but it is good if you have some lighting fixtures or something that is shiny that you want to kind of show off. This is in that same grouping under the render pull-down menu. It's lens flare. Okay, and it gives you a nice little preview. And as you can see, it kind of has these glares, and you can make it brighter or less bright. Now, I don't think I have anything that's particularly shiny, so this is probably fine. So I'll click OK. And again, it just adds a little bit of gradient to your image. And there are many things that you could do on this image if you wanted to add some more features, maybe some finishing touches. Some of them are similar to what we've learned. So, for example, this feathered image selection, I'm going to select the inverse. I could apply a filter, and now because I have everything flattened, it will apply it to the entire image. In this case, I'm just going to apply a brightness contrast, and maybe I'll darken the perimeter. This is known as vignetting. Okay, I could also do this with a black and white filter or any number of things. I could also, in this case, there's a border that came in from SketchUp. I could erase some of the things on the other side of that border to touch it up. But anyway, this image is probably ready to go. Certainly, I think I would like all of you to try at least 12 different filters of some sort. You may not use them all. In fact, as you can see from this example, I probably only used 3 or 4. But I'd like you to try at least 12. Now, some of them came out of SketchUp, and I had probably 6 different ones coming out of SketchUp. And then just trying either black and white or color filters. You can probably come up with a bunch more, and you can try as many as you like. Again, sometimes it's fun just to see what you end up with. Then absolutely on this project, I would like you to do a test strip. And in fact, depending on when you're listening to this, you may have already gotten my email saying that I'm going to have our printed drawings from the composition project due later, because I'm afraid not enough of you are doing that test strip. And I don't want you to waste your money on the expensive printer until you've done that test strip and we've had a chance to review them. Anyway, other than that, good luck getting this printed, and you can print this on the either printer, any of the printers that you like, but the Z3200s are certainly fine. If you like the results that you're getting and you want a high quality image, by all means use the better printer. The only thing is, in this particular image, 20 inches is the size that we're shooting for. So by all means, you can use the smaller printer, the smaller roll on the smaller printers.